Well, thank you both so much for being on the SoundWorks collection. Before we talk about Atlas, I'd love to just talk about who found who. Did Andrew find Brad? Did Brad find Andrew? How did your guys' relationship find each other?
Probably have to give Bo Flynn the credit for that one, because he was the producer that brought us together for Journey 2. He'd produced Journey 1. And he asked me to kind of meet with a bunch of the keys, and I met with a bunch, and the only one that I carried from Journey 1 into Journey 2 was Andrew. And so Bo is the one that kind of connected us at the very, very beginning. So I don't know actually who found who in that regard, but Bo found both of us.
What was it that you saw in Andrew? What was it that caught your attention?
I think it was the Canadian flag cape that he wore into the meeting, that I was just like, oh, wow. Oh, yeah. Okay. I think you might be Canadian. And he was just like, what makes you say that, as he threw his cape around? No, the thing that stood out to me right away was just like his demeanor. Obviously, it's very even keeled. I tend to be like more hot and cold, I guess, especially compared to Andrew. And then the thing that like really leapt out to me was his ability to write themes. Like when we were doing Journey 2 and then San Andreas, those were very like theme forward pieces, especially Journey 2. And so his like knack for being able to write catchy, emotional, epic themes is the first thing that stood out to me. And then the second thing is that once we got into working together was the work ethic, like the sense that, like for me, I think a lot of times my best work, and I think a lot of filmmakers and artists are like this, it comes from a kind of a deep source of knowledge is the best way I've heard it put, where it's like when you get to know something so well that no matter what comes up, you can easily kind of adjust, So it's like, you're not talking about something, the topic is an inch thick. You're talking about something that has feet of depth of knowledge and resources. And so one of the things that allows you to have that is repetition of just work, is like putting in the work and putting in the time. So I remember on Journey 2, we were dealing with, a sequel to a franchise that had made money. It had a history with Ray Harryhausen, who I was a big fan of. And we just did reps. We just sort of like played and like did reps. And a lot of people, in my experience, will say they'll do that, but they won't do it. And then when they get into it, either their pride or their hubris or something gets in the way of like the exploration process. And I think like largely, I feel like I bonded with Andrew through just that, just sort of like trying to get it right and just trying to do the reps and trying to explore, how good we could get something at that point in our careers. And sort of that's the ongoing relationship we have, which is like, how can we do better? Where can we go next? How can we evolve? What's new? What's going on in the industry? What's going on with us? And, how far can we push this thing? And that's what makes it fun, because you're constantly searching,
Yeah, that's wonderful. Andrew, how much of that checks out? And also you sign up in a way with a director, and you're kind of on this train and there's pictures. You're not really sure what films are going to be part of this director's, repertoire and what they're going to kind of say yes to. So when you start to understand what the type of material that Brad was saying yes to, what was both creatively interesting and challenging? Because like the size and scale of the images that Brad is presenting you, it's mind blowing to me.
Yeah. First of all, I'll say that first meeting, I remember showing up and Brad said straight out of the gate, what would you do with this Journey theme to bring it to another level? And I told him, I've gotten pretty good at describing music, and Brad has gotten pretty good at saying, just show me. I don't want to hear the description. Do it and show me. So I remember that first meeting going away, and him, and I came back to him a few days later and said, this is what I'm thinking. And he said, yeah, let's go further. And this was like a 2.5 month process. I was convinced after the third day I was hired and was working on the film. This is all I was doing at this point. And I remember my agent calling me 2.5 months in and saying, good news, Brad wants to move forward and hire you. And I thought, I've been working on this for 2.5 months. I thought I was hired 2.5 months ago. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of the relationship. And I don't think we've stopped. I think that that same process we've gone through movie to movie. The projects keep changing, but our process stays the same. And I'd say in terms of what he does, music can be really challenging for big visual spectacles, especially when it's an afterthought, when they come to you and they say, here's our movie, put music here, and you realize there's not a lot of room on the dance floor to do your moves. With Brad, it's very different because music is one of the very first things he thinks about. I think maybe it's one of the very first things along with everything else, but in terms of my relationship with him, he's ready to talk music right at the very initial meeting with the studio. He's thinking music. He's thinking, how is music going to help tell the story? What is it going to do different than the visuals? And he gives the music some real estate in the storytelling and some responsibility. So it's not just filling the holes, but in fact, it's a part of the cake. It's an important ingredient, and all of the other elements need to make room for it in the same way that it needs to make room for them.
That's wonderful. So Brad, for Atlas, when you're maybe, working with the writers, understanding the story, understanding the beats of the film, what do you tell Andrew? How much do you show him? How much direction do you give him? And what was your first task? What were you hoping that he'd come back with to give you some kind of, a canvas to start working with?
Atlas was different than all my other experiences. So it's a little bit, it's a little stranger of a one. The issue I had with Atlas is the script didn't settle for a long time. Like even into shooting, the script wasn't settling. So different on my other movies, the script had long settled and we were able to kind of really hyper focus. With Atlas, that wasn't the case, which was, to a detriment of the process, and something that moving forward, I'd really focus on protecting. But the stuff that we'd done ahead of it was we talked about themes. We had gone to Japan because I said, I want to record sounds and sound effects, sounds like musical elements that we could use in the score that would separate it from anything else we've ever done. And, Andrew really wisely zoned in on the humanity of the project because, it was interesting because, I started the movie 5 years ago and the AI conversation was not what it is today. And so, which is one of the reasons the critics shredded me, but I had no control over that. But we were like, okay, AI is like this cold, inhuman thing, and we want to tell this story that shows sort of the good and bad of it. Because even though it's not a popular opinion, the truth is that AI is a tool. And every day you see people coming out and saying, oh, AI is evil and da-da-da, and AI will do this. Well, it's like also AI can do a lot of good, right? It comes down to kind of how we utilize it. And so with that sort of thesis, we were like, well, let's make sure there's a strong sense of humanity between Jennifer and Smith and what they go through. And so he had zeroed in on these monks and, they'd never been recorded before. I don't think they're Westerners or had ever been in their temple. So we knew right away, we were like, okay, we're going into this territory of just stuff that had never been done. And that's part of the conversation we always have is like, I'm not looking for gimmicks so much as I'm looking for, solid, really like meaty concepts that really kind of the proof is in the pudding in terms of like this has true unique musical value. And I thought it was really, really wise to kind of focus in on these monks and these choral elements. And also with Malachi, the young boy in England who did the pieces, it just brings soul to it where it's very hard for me to imagine this, but at the initial onset, there were a lot of people that were like, oh no, this should be like a synth score, like a tech score. And I was like, this isn't Tron. Like, it's not cold. I don't want to make a cold movie. I want to make a movie that says there's heart in all different aspects of the world, and we have to engage technology in the same way because it's coming. We're going to have to engage it, And just saying it's bad doesn't seem to me to do much good for humanity. Because if it's coming and you just want to like put your head in the sand and say it's all bad, that's not really going to amount to anything positive. So I was really impressed by that. And I was really impressed by Andrew's like not just willingness, but like determination to go seek out these new sounds and and he recorded constantly. Like he recorded Bullet Train, he recorded everything all the time. We were recording anything that could be musical or ambient or sound effect oriented. We recorded. And so that was the most unique kind of research, I guess, assignment I'd ever done for music. Just very exciting because it allows you to kind of go, oh, wow, we have so much to build from here. So that was the biggest thing for me between Andrew and I for Atlas.
Andrew, where did you start with the prologue, the main title? Like, where do you start?
Finding the most important music scenes, really. That's the first thing to write. I don't write chronologically. Brad and I I'll come with a bunch of ideas and he'll help me shape them, and we'll kind of figure out basically get the important points on the map figured out. And then through that, once those are established, fill in the gaps with the evolution of music in between. In this film, I call the theme Birth of a Species, and it's the theme that Malachi sings. And I had recorded it years ago. I'd been recording at Air, something else, and had a youth choir there. And I pulled this girl aside and I said, "Can you sing this for me? Because this is an idea I have for Brad's movie." It was literally 5 years ago. And I recorded it and always loved it and played it for Brad. And I remember Brad's first reaction was, "I don't know where we put this, but this is definitely going in the movie." So that was kind of our first idea, and it kind of grew from there.
To me, the film really takes off, obviously, when Atlas is ejected from the ship, it's exploding, and she's free falling, to this planet. To me, like visually, I was like, oh, I love how the composition, Brad, just how you use camera and how you move through it. But then like sonically, you're like, oh, this is like a bad situation. So talk about the balance of what's happening visually and sound effects. And then Andrew, like you're like the beat of this, like, you still have like a big task ahead of you for this a pretty long sequence.
For me, it comes into knowing the story you're going to tell as early as humanly possible. Like, so understanding, like any good director, like you understand a shot is a 3-act structure, a scene is a 3-act structure, a sequence is a 3-act structure. And for people who don't like think like that, I just mean it has a beginning, middle, and end. Right. So a good shot has a beginning, middle, and end. It's like, it's not necessarily just a camera pointed at something. It's you're trying to tell a beginning, middle, and end of everything. And so when you come in and you design a sequence, you're going, okay, what's the movements here visually? Like or emotionally, really, like, okay, so she's free falling, nothing is working. She's rattling around in this tin can. She breaks the clouds. She's suddenly in a battle. Then it's chaos for this moment. So I'm going to let the audience lose where they are and lose where she is for like this 5 seconds. And then we're going to pick it up when a new element comes in where the Dahib is going to crash and almost kill her. Then we're going to have to crash land her with the help of the Ranger. Then the Ranger dies and she crash lands on her own. Right. So there's 5 little acts in there that I was working with. And so once you kind of understand, and the reason I did 5 acts instead of 3 is because I don't want the audience to ever get a handle on it. If it's just 3 acts, they just go, okay, this is the beginning. Oh, this is the middle and this is the end. But I'm like, I don't want you to be able to judge that. I don't want you to be able to understand that in the storytelling. I want you to get like, oh, this is why it's overwhelming for people and why they sit up in that sequence is because I designed it so they couldn't get a handle on it. And then it really visually, once that's established and you've done that, then what you're really doing is working with Andrew and Per Halberg, who is our sound effects designer. And it's just a lot of conversation. And I generally let the two of them arm wrestle, to be honest with you. I let them just kind of like talk amongst them. I'm like, this is the story I want to tell. And here's what I'm thinking. And a lot of it, like I just sort of did it when I explained it to you, like, she's just rattling around in a tin can. So guess what is going to lead there? Sound effects, right? Then she gets overwhelmed, and that's where the music's going to start to come back in. And now we're back into the drama, and the music has to like guide us through some of that drama. So a lot of it is the three of us sort of getting on the same page early, so we know the intention. And I say that because, you know, as a filmmaker, your intention is always one thing, and then reality comes in and you run into certain things. But largely, like, because I'm plan oriented, especially with action, I shoot what I set out to shoot. And so we're able to kind of, from a very early stage. The other thing is I shoot most of my action myself. So I don't really rely on another unit to do that, unless it's like very stunt oriented, where I'm like not going to sit around for 4 hours while they shoot a guy jumping over something. But like the having the design, the foundation, the structure of something allows then the people around you, Andrew, Pear, to kind of like start talking very early. And that way they're not spinning their wheels is the biggest thing. It's allowing all the creatives around me to get the best work and the best out of the situation, because I'm trying to be as clear as possible with everybody involved of like, this is the goal. These are the steps that we're going for. So that's sort of how I see it.
Yeah, that's wonderful for you, Andrew, because I will say it is very apparent when music drops out and sound effects lead or vice versa. Like, you guys do it many times in very impactful ways, like big explosions. You build those dynamics into your mix. So Andrew, talk about this free fall scene.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because, and I'm happy to say it's never a wrestling match with Pear or Bob Doucet, our editor. It's really the four of us putting our heads together and saying, which of us is going to best tell the story in this particular moment? And that one of the things I love about the way Pear does sound, and through Brad, this is the third project we've done together, Pear and I, and is that he is very much a composer. He is using sound to tell the story and not just to fill a void because something's moving on screen. It's his sound effects are storytelling elements more than almost any other element, really, other than music. And so it's a lot of, actually just brass tacks. Pear and I talk every 2 weeks or more. And we'll send stuff back and forth to each other. And a lot of times that's with Brad. And a lot of times when Brad's doing other things, we're constantly sharing information. And that particular sequence, I had scored much more of it. And I showed it to Pear. And Pear had said, okay, in these areas I've dropped out for you because music's more important. And he sort of went through that sequence and said, this is what the sound needs to tell us here. Needs to tell us that when the thrusters fire, they have to turn on because that will save her life. So I said, no problem. I will step back completely here, because at that moment, a lot of what the music was doing that I'd written was creating chaos, and chaos existed already. So inadvertently, if it's already at a 10 without music, sometimes music can hold your hand and tell the audience, oh, we're watching a movie. And completely take them out of the first person experience. So that scene in particular was one we talked a lot about, and really the four of us figured out the choreography of that together. The biggest advantage of these relationships, and they're not common, like composers and sound effects supervisors don't have this kind of communication on most projects. But when we get to the dub stage, everything, certainly the choreography of where I'm dancing, where he's dancing, but like the pitch of the sound effects, he'll have heard the music and know what key I'm in, and he'll put sympathetic pitches in his sound effects. All this stuff that wastes so much time on the dub stage, or with mixers who aren't as experienced, where they might, take it and say music 50%, sound effects 50%. It's very much a taking turns leading, and it makes such a difference just in terms of not exhausting the audience and and in both of us having our room to help propel the story forward with our art.
Something that I want to hone in on is that collaboration of sound and music, especially with Smith when you introduced the theme and the chime on sequence and how you guys tie that in. So was that sound? Was it what Pear was thinking first? The sound came first, and then you played off of that, or because everything that Brad said about the relationship of AI. This is a different type of relationship, obviously, and Smith and Atlas have a unique one. So how did that come about?
For me, anyway, Brad, I'm sure will have a different perspective on it, but I wrote that theme of the goodbye between those two characters early on. It's one of maybe the second or third thing I wrote that I threw up against the dailies. Brad's always great about bringing me to set, showing me the tone of the film and what he's capturing, and also making sure I'm getting dailies. And when I put the music up against that, I thought, wow, this is powerful. This is going to work. Now I have to figure out how to back sync it so that it has roots in the story, and the audience has heard that theme before this moment, and really that moment in the film is the first time they earn it. So how can I subconsciously adhere the audience to that melody so that when they hear it in that payoff moment, it's not the very first time? So a couple ways. One way Brad and I discussed was putting it in the on chime, as you've discussed. So when she's going through the tutorial and each time she selects something, she at one point goes back to the beginning. Every possible opportunity, let's throw that chime in there. And the chime is the first three notes of that theme that we're going to use later. But it's an important hook that I think the audience gets used to subconsciously. And then the other idea Brad had was when she's watching the tutorial talk, the lecture that her mom made years and years before, we needed music behind that. And at one point there'd been sort of this electronica sort of sound, probably the kind of sound that a lot of people would have thought we'd score this movie with. And Brad said, what if we try that theme there? And the great thing in that moment is we get a chance to hear that piano string, very minimalist theme. But at this moment in time, our main character is opposed to it. She resents it. She resents how her mother feels about AI. So it's a chance for the audience to hear that theme before the main character has even gotten there. So those little moments were all ways of kind of trying to sneak it in. And I think of it in the way of, I used to have this anyway. I'd go to the record store before you could download stuff, buy a CD of your favorite band. You're so excited. You run out to the car, you throw it in, and you go, what the hell happened? These guys were so good and they're terrible. And it's that first time you hear something, you're never going to absorb it. So it's by the fifth time I've heard this new album when I was in high school, I loved it again. But I needed those 5 listens to really internalize it and absorb it. So as a composer, you're trying to find those first 4.
What I'm taking away from this, Andrew, is that everyone needs to watch the movie 4 to 5 times.
Exactly. Well, hopefully, undoubtedly, they will like it the more they watch it.
That's true.
But hopefully those who watched it once will experience this by that final scene.
I think it sinks in, right? It's tricky. It's the education through intuition is what you're trying to do with the music. Like everything Andrew's saying checks out 100%. I would say that Andrew's very good at looking at the playing field and starting to embed his music so that it can be an intuitive process. Because at the end of the day, it's like one of the biggest conversations we always have is I don't love just pure like intellectual concepts. I like them as thought exercises. I like understanding like the math behind something, but they're almost valueless if they don't have an emotional component that has an emotional value, because that's why we watch movies. There's very few films that we watch and we're just looking for an intellectual exercise. And, I think Christopher Nolan's very famous and very revered because he does both. If he just did the intellectual thing, even though everyone thinks he's highly intellectual, which he is, he's also doing this very kind of nuanced emotional journey. And so that's one of the things that Andrew, the reason that these little kind of pieces are in there to kind of educate you, is to sort of build up the emotional experience that you're going to have. And he's very, very good at finding opportunities to do that.
One of the instances that really was powerful and also moving is like with Smith and Atlas when they do sync up, and there's that's a pretty long stretch of dialogue just between, Atlas talking to like a heads up display, basically, the representation of Smith. But Brad, can you just talk about giving them enough time? I mean, it's on the page, but I also feel like once it's a cue when they do sync up, it's so satisfying. Like it then propels them forward. All right, they're now together, and it's a cohesive kind of mission of mind.
Yeah, I mean, it was way longer on the page, to be honest with you. There was like a lot more, and what we discovered was we didn't need it. Like, first of all, we're all wanting them to sync. We're wanting them to sync for a while, and then as we understand why they're not syncing and what's gone on in her past, we realize this is just the moment that she sort of lets her guard down and becomes vulnerable. And in that vulnerability is finally a reward of a friendship or a bond. And so, to me, the exercise there was, how quickly can we get to that inside of this scene and still feel like she's earning it? Because she's really been earning it slowly over time. This movie was very tricky in the storytelling, to be completely honest, because you have to uncover the reason why she doesn't want to do certain things slowly, because she doesn't even want to have those conversations with herself, let alone with this AI who's like kind of incepting her thoughts, So by the time we got to that scene, the big takeaway for me was, we've been doing this exercise the whole movie of them trying to get on the same page. So at this point, we just have to focus on her finally letting him in so that they can kind of take off to the place that we've wanted them to get to. So it was more of a floodgates opening moment than it was like a slow build. But it wasn't initially that. It was initially a much longer back and forth. And then through working with Bob and editing it down, we discovered, okay, this really needs to be just the last turning up the screw more than anything else.
The approach to Harlan's base and then the escape, her fleeing. I mean, like the number of set pieces you have in this is kind of, I myself, they don't feel like, here's another set piece. We have to go through another escape. Like they all felt unique because the environments are changing, and you kind of see like you're waiting for the new skill set to come on of what she can kind of, use. Andrew, can you talk about when you're once again presented with a pretty long scene of escaping that has little pockets of different moments? How do you manage that marathon of just providing music throughout?
It's two very important tools. One is having a relationship with the director on a movie like this, where he can guide you through what you're not seeing. And I'm starting to write to very, very rudimentary visuals initially. So it's so much imagination, and it has to be based on fact. So it has to be Brad's imagination being communicated to me. And there's so many times where, Brad will say, this is great, but can the music do this when this happens, when he grabs the sword? Where does he grab the sword? And he's like, oh yeah, you don't know this part yet, but he grabs the sword right here. So that stuff's like incredibly important. And especially in those sequences you're talking about, I was scoring things that I hadn't seen. So I was just sort of doing the big, broad pieces. And then as the visual effects were coming in, adjusting as you go. And inevitably what happens is you end up recording, and then that evolution of visual effects is still happening. So the second tool is our music editor, and we had a brilliant one, Joe Bond, who we've worked with a bunch of times. And Joe is amazing at knowing, memorizing the points where the music needs to sync, and then the other points where it can be more elastic and be adjusted around the visuals as they come in. So both of those things were really the only way to make it work. The other big thing is to make sure you're scoring a big idea and not a movement, not a moment. And that's the great thing about Brad's films, is even the action sequences, the music's not just, he's not saying just be kinetic. He's saying this is how she feels in this moment. This is how we want the audience to feel. So emotions are much more broad and not, filling in the gap between points on a graph. It's an overall feeling. So as long as I got that right, then the syncing up of the little things later was much easier.
Big shout out to your music editor who's going to be chasing, previs through all the times you have a picture update. I know how it is to be on a mixing stage when there's a picture update, everything stops and there's a reset. Like, all right, what are they doing? What are they doing? So I think that makes clear, sense. Brad, what can you say about, how do you react to just, the visual effects, always in development, always in production?
It's difficult in my position because I know what it is going to look like in my head, but at the same time, I've also learned to give a little bit of space for the VFX supervisor and for new ideas to evolve. So it gets even better and better and better. So, which is tricky into itself because you're like, this is the story we're telling. This is what we have to execute. And then of course, 4 other people have 4 different points of view of what the most important thing is, and you have to wrangle that. But generally speaking, I have a pretty clear idea of the intention of every VFX shot and every beat, so that it's at least very clear for me what the story is going to be. But yeah, it's what Andrew's saying is true, is that it's like you rely on the editor or the sound editor or the music editor. You rely on them being in sync with you because, I'm happy to say this is what it's going to be. They have to remember that and imagine this is where it's going to go. Because it does take forever. Like, on these movies, you're on the mix stage and there's shots. Frankly, at some points, you're turning around to your VFX supervisor and you're saying, when are we going to not have to look at this anymore? Because I'm tired of looking at this previs. Nobody understands what it is. I'm sick of getting notes about it because previs can only do so much. The storytelling is going to be basic, So a lot of times they'd be like, whoa, what's going on here? The amount of times I've been asked questions about what's happening in a shot and where it seems very obvious to me on these movies is thousands and thousands of times. So yeah, it takes a really tight team that works really well together to get in sync and stay in sync.
Half of those were me, I'm sure.
None of those were you, Andrew. We know where all of those questions come from, and they're not from the composer.
So I think this is a good time to bring up, in the future, having visual effects match their visuals to the music would be a really good way to go.
I'll mention that. I'll mention that to the 6,000 people doing the visual effects.
To me, as we get to the tail end of the film and the story and Atlas is saying goodbye to Smith, that cue you have, Andrew, I was not expecting that. And how you guys play out that scene, I was like, oh, don't do it. And you do it. It's such a heartfelt moment. And obviously, Jennifer Lopez is acting the hell out of that scene. But what you guys are doing melodically, talk about that cue, which then obviously, the payoff, obviously, with we'll give away the ending when she basically steps back in and we're reintroduced, but talk about that cue of saying goodbye.
So I like to think that music can influence a performance maybe 20%. It can add 20% or pull it back 20%. It can't change it. Audiences are so sophisticated that if there's no chemistry between two characters, a romantic theme isn't going to add it, or not in this day and age. So the great thing about that scene and so much of this movie, all of Jennifer's performances, all of the performances, there's no heavy lifting that the music had to do. It didn't have to make anything. It was already there. So it's purely a reflection of her performance. And had she not gone to the vulnerable place that she did and not been so honest with her emotional portrayal of this character, the music couldn't have gone there. So really I'm just reflecting what's there, and I think it's effective because it can be minimalist in that moment. But the only way it can be minimalist is because all that emotion's already in the performance. So, but it is one of my favorite moments in the film, and just being able to do that in that moment and then plant all the little Easter eggs leading up to it was really important and a real payoff.
Brad, for you, where the film ends. I mean, that shot's pretty epic. The sun is rising, and like it's a very dramatic. It's visually just so well conceived. What to you? When did you know you had it? Like, okay, like we have our ending. We know where we're gonna land.
As soon as she showed up, I was like, oh, she's here to do the thing. Like, she's ready to go, and you have conversations with your stars. You read the script with them. You go through and talk about what's the important thing about scenes. She's a very, she wants to go home and do her homework and show up and perform. And the thing about it is when you work with someone like that, who's like, okay, give me all the information. I want to go away and digest it. There's not like a lot of questions. There's not a lot of dialogue, but you're using your opportunities to get the most important stuff out. You're never positive when they show up what they're going to do because they haven't shared everything with you. Now, that's not Jennifer. That's a lot of actors, And as soon as she showed up and she started performing, I was like, okay, she's really going for it here. Like, she's really dialed in. And then I had to learn sort of how she works in terms of on the day. Like, what's the best way to get her through a scene or through like a patch that isn't quite landing or whatever it is. And I discovered with her, she's so intuitive that it's better to point in a broad direction and let her go than to give her like really picky stuff, So that's sort of how we worked. And in that scene in particular, as soon as we settled on the actual lines of dialogue that she would say, because that's, she likes to massage stuff, which is great. It's like always trying to get the best out of it. Once we landed on that, then it was just smooth sailing because what you see is what you get. Like when you see her in the movie, her takes aren't super different. They just kind of go over here and try out some different words and go over here and try, but the emotion is there and she's delivering that, almost like in an unfiltered way, And so as soon as she got on stage and started doing that scene, I was just like, oh, this is the thing. Like, we have it. Like, she's here, And I also want to just give a shout out to Greg Cohen, who voiced Smith, because at that point, and this is like one of the beauties of being a filmmaker that I don't know if other filmmakers feel this way, but I came from a very small town, Gander, Newfoundland, Canada. And it's like, I never thought I'd be in this position, and it took a lot of work, and it continues to take a lot of work to keep my place, and I have no like family in the industry. And then every once in a while you meet someone who's in the same position that you were, 10 years ago, who are willing to do anything, to show up an hour early, to stay an hour late, and he was there as a day player just to be there to read opposite her. There's no contract. You're going to be the voice of Smith. There's no conversation about it. I kind of heard it I cast him because I heard that's how Smith should talk. That's how I picture Smith. No one else like was in on that, like they were like, it's just a guy to read lines, but the more people heard him, the more people on set would come and go, man, he's perfect. Where'd you get him? And then I started thinking, as soon as they see him cut in, they're never going to be able to hear anyone else. And in those scenes, those really emotional scenes, you see Jen giving it, but there's also someone else giving it back in live time, in real time. And he was that guy. And so I think they had a really good rapport, mostly in the sense that he was there just to help her through everything in a way that a lot of co-stars, because of ego and hubris and all those things, wouldn't be in the same way. I mean, everyone knows like there's some big stars that are there when you're off camera and they're giving it their all for their fellow thespians. And there's a lot that don't do that. And he was there 100% every single take, every single day. And I think she benefited immensely. And then what I like about it is that he benefited it back. He was so right that he went from being Velocipaster, which is, I guess, a priest that turns into a velociraptor, is the movie that Greg starred in. And then he went from that, I'm going to assume a very small budget, to this. And it's like, I like being part of, rewarding people for their hard work and their dedication to their craft and having their heart in the right place and doing the right thing. And so I feel like that part of this is very rewarding. And a lot of what you see in this whole movie with her and the emotion, it starts from usually a dynamic. And in this case, it was Greg kind of supporting that dynamic with her. And then, like Andrew said, now the music can just lay on top in an organic way where we're not like fighting to make this thing emotional. Well, it's already emotional. When the music comes in, people are going to sob, or people are going to be like, oh, wow, I didn't expect this sort of level of emotion. That's, I think, how you get there. You have to craft it in a way that's really there so that the music can kind of place itself into it, as opposed to like lay on top of it or suddenly get underneath it and push it all the way up. And that's where you get into these like inorganic sensations that you get sometimes when you see a movie where you're like, oh, this is supposed to be scary, but I'm not scared. Like the music's telling me to feel a certain way, but I'm not really feeling that. I think that a lot of times it's the cast kind of getting into a place where it's like that raw emotion is there. So then the music can kind of come in and fill it in, fill the rest in.
Andrew, any last thoughts as we wrap up? What sticks to you in your mind about this project? Because, you guys have done 5 films together and some 8 or 9 projects, but yeah, what's unique about this one?
I think it's amazing, actually, the evolution from when we started working together, which was 2010 or 11-ish, the first film. Movies are constantly evolving. And more importantly than that, I think they're responding to the audience sophistication. And just going back again to that the goodbye scene of Atlas and Smith, that could very easily be a scene about death and about saying goodbye. And instead, it's a scene about thank you. It's a final, like, out of respect for Smith, Atlas says, this is how you've changed me. I'm revealing a part of me to you. And this is what you're leaving me with. And musically, that was also really important. I think if the music is telling you what to feel or scoring your emotion, the audience can remove themselves and be looking at it way from the distance and through a barrier. And a lot of this movie, I think what we tried to do, and I think it's a lesson for us going forward and films going forward, is the music should create a situation and put the audience in a place where they have the catalyst to feel that emotion on their own. So very much with Smith, it's a thank you. And then it's the audience putting together, oh shit, he's dying. Like, this is goodbye. But the music isn't saying goodbye. The music's saying thank you. So I think that was something Brad did really cleverly through this entire film, is let's set up the situations and the emotions for the audience to feel something, not react to the music feeling it first.
Andrew, Brad, thank you guys both so much for your time. For folks who haven't had a chance to see Atlas, is playing obviously on Netflix, and
double thumbs up it. Make the algorithm happy.
Many thanks to our guests today, and if you'd like to listen to more conversations from the SoundWorks collection, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on all major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube. You can also find exclusive daily video clips on our Instagram and TikTok pages, and connect with other creatives around the world through our email industry mailing list at soundworkscollection.com. If you have a story or a project that you want to propose for the show, please send us an email at info@soundworkscollection.com, and thanks again for listening.